Panic in survival exam, human establishes a homestead by sundown. The descent was a calculated violence. Inside the Zenith Combine's Mark IV Crucible pod, Calvec remained rigid. His four-hooved feet were braced against the deck plating as the pod screamed through the upper atmosphere of Viridian 7. His analytical mind processed the telemetry in real time. Gravimetric shear was 12% above projected norms. Atmospheric friction was generating unexpected ionic interference. The pod's final deceleration thrusters were firing with a 3.7% margin of error. It was suboptimal, but within acceptable parameters for failure. Across from him, Hissel was not faring as well. The sibilant alien's respiratory membranes, normally a calm, shimmering silver, had contracted into tight, panicked knots. A low hiss escaped him. The scent of ozone and acute terror filled the recycled air. The particulate count is suffocating. The thermal shielding is fluctuating. My cilia are retracting into my primary lung sac. Varus, the third of the Combine's chosen candidates, said nothing. He remained frozen in his crash harness. His four large, dark eyes absorbed the chaotic data streams without comment. He was an observer, a biological archivist. Panic was an inefficient expenditure of energy. He would simply watch, record, and if survival was the outcome, categorize the experience later. Then there was the primate, Leo Vance. He was a last-minute addition to their cohort, a product of some administrative oversight from the newly admitted Terran systems. He possessed no specialized biological advantages, no subdermal plating, no enhanced sensory organs. Academically, he was a disaster. Throughout their preparatory studies, he had demonstrated a profound inability to grasp multidimensional calculus. He had referred to Xen ethology as alien people-watching. Ikalvek had already calculated a 97.4% probability that the human would be the first to perish. The final impact was a bone-jarring slam that sent a shudder through the pod's frame. For a moment, there was only the sound of stressed metal groaning and the frantic hissing from Hissel. Then a calm voice from the AI speaker announced, "Disembarkation authorized. Crucible trial commenced. Good luck, candidates." The hatch hissed open, revealing a wall of suffocatingly humid air. Viridian 7. The official designation was Verdant Graveyard, a world where the flora was often more aggressive than the fauna. Towering, stalk-like trees pulsed with an unhealthy purple light. Their broad leaves formed a canopy that plunged the jungle floor into a perpetual twilight. The air was a thick cocktail of strange pollen, wet earth, and a cloying sweetness that hinted at decay. Kylvek was the first to step out. His sensors immediately began analyzing the environment. Atmospheric composition contains trace neuroinhibitors. Soil acidity is high. Recommend immediate establishment of a sterile perimeter. Hissal slithered out next, collapsing onto the mossy ground. "We are all going to dissolve," he gasped. Leo Vance disembarked last. He was not wearing a rebreather or activating any biosensors. He simply stepped onto the alien soil. He took a deep breath that made the others flinch and looked around. A slow, thoughtful expression crossed his face. He squinted at the pulsating trees and the thick, humid air. "Huh," he muttered quietly to himself, his voice a low rumble. "Smells like my uncle's greenhouse after a rainstorm." In the hours that followed, the clearing became a theater of sophisticated failure. The three Zenith Combine candidates, paragons of their respective species, defaulted to the specialized training that had earned them their place in the Crucible trial. Kelvek, the logician, began pacing the perimeter of the crash site in a complex triangular pattern. "A sterile zone is the first tactical necessity," he declared to the oppressive humidity. He began kicking away piles of damp leaves and scratching lines into the soil. He was attempting to form a geometric barrier based on the principles of predatory exclusion theory. He reasoned that most non-sentient aggressors were deterred by unnatural patterns that disrupted their territorial instincts. Within minutes, a swarm of six-legged beetle-like creatures swarmed over his carefully drawn lines. They were utterly undeterred and began consuming the nutrient-rich moss he had exposed. Hissel, meanwhile, had sought refuge near the base of a pulsating fungus. Believing the primary threat to be atmospheric, he began secreting a thick, iridescent mucus from his skin. "I shall form a filtration cocoon," he announced to Varys, who was watching from a safe distance. "This will neutralize the airborne neuroinhibitors and maintain a stable humidity." The cocoon, while impressive, had an unforeseen side effect. Its pungent, protein-rich aroma proved irresistible to the local insect life. Soon, Hissel was covered in a swarm of tiny, iridescent flies with an irritating, high-pitched buzz. This forced him to abandon his glistening shelter with a frustrated hiss. Varys attempted the most energy-efficient strategy of all. He located a smooth, flat rock, folded his limbs beneath him, and tried to enter a state of low-frequency meditation. The technique was designed to lower his biological signature to near zero, rendering him effectively invisible to most predators. The strategy might have worked in the serene, predictable environments of the Academy's training spheres. Here on Viridian 7, the cacophony of the jungle made true focus impossible. The dripping of acidic sap, the shriek of arboreal hunters, the relentless buzz of Hissel's new fan club, all shattered his concentration every few moments. It left him more drained than before. Leo Vance had engaged in none of these complex activities. After his initial survey, he had simply wandered into the dense undergrowth, disappearing from sight for nearly an hour. The aliens, preoccupied with their own failing strategies, paid him no mind. He was a variable they had already dismissed. When he returned, he was dragging several long, thick vines. He also carried an armful of sturdy branches stripped of their leaves. He dropped the materials in a heap between two massive, moss-covered trees. Their thick, interwoven roots provided a solid foundation. He then began clearing the area with his hands and feet, tossing aside rocks and pulling up the smaller, pulsating fungi. Hessal, having finally shaken the last of the flies, watched the human's strange, repetitive labor. "The primate is exhibiting classic nesting behavior," he whispered to Kalvek. "It is a documented response to terminal stress. The subject reverts to primitive instincts when higher cognitive function fails." Kalvek glanced over from his beetle-infested perimeter. His actions remain inefficient. He is not cataloging threats or analyzing resource distribution. He is tidying. He made a clicking sound of disapproval. "He will be the first to perish." Leo heard none of it. He was focused. He picked up one of the branches he'd gathered and tested its weight. He felt its density, then swung it against a rock. The impact sent a solid, satisfying thud through his hands. A small cloud of spores puffed up from the disturbed moss. "Good flex," he muttered. "Solid core. This'll do." Dusk on Viridian 7 did not fall. It bled. The oppressive purple twilight gave way to an inky, starless black. The air grew teeth. A damp cold seeped through Kalvek's insulated hide and caused Hissel's respiratory membranes to ache. The jungle's symphony changed its tune. The daytime chirps and clicks were replaced by the low, guttural growls of nocturnal hunters. The skittering whispers of things that moved in the dark filled the air. The three aliens huddled together in the hollow of a great gnarled root. The space offered meager protection from the elements, but it amplified every terrifying sound. Kalvek's logical mind, which could solve orbital mechanics in seconds, offered no solution for the gnawing cold in his four limbs. Hissel had wrapped himself in broad, waxy leaves, but they were quickly becoming slick with a chilling dew. Varys sat shivering. His attempt at meditative warmth was failing utterly against the planet's raw hostility. They were cold, they were hungry, and their initial confidence had curdled into a quiet, dignified terror. Above them, there was industry. Leo Vance worked with a steady, unhurried rhythm that seemed an act of defiance against the dying light. Using the vines he had gathered, he lashed the platform of branches together. He used a series of complex interlocking knots. He worked by the faint, eerie glow of the bioluminescent fungi. His hands moved with a certainty that was both baffling and infuriating to the watchers below. He had created a stable, elevated floor, a perch 10 feet above the damp, dangerous ground. Then he started on the fire. He cleared a small circle on a flat rock outcrop beneath his platform, shielding it from the wind. He took a dry, fibrous stick and a curved, harder piece of wood, carving a small notch into it. With a length of vine wrapped around the spindle, he began to work. The motion was rhythmic and hypnotic. For long minutes, nothing happened. "A futile effort," Kalvek chattered, his breath fogging in the cold air. The wood is too damp. The atmospheric oxygen content is variable. He lacks a proper ignition source. But then, a tiny wisp of smoke appeared, thin and gray. Leo hunched over it, protecting it with his body. He whispered to it like a lover. He added tiny, hair-like fibers of dry moss he'd collected. The wisp grew thicker. He blew gently, steadily, nurturing the fragile spark. A tiny red ember glowed in the darkness. Varus's 4 eyes widened. His voice, when it came, was a choked whisper. He has created fire, without a plasma igniter. The ember caught. A small, hungry flame licked at the kindling. Leo added larger sticks, one by one, until a crackling, cheerful fire pushed back the oppressive darkness and the chilling cold. The warmth washed over the clearing, a wave of impossible comfort. The huddle of aliens unconsciously leaned toward it, drawn by a primal need that transcended their advanced learning. With the fire established, Leo turned his attention to dinner. He produced several large, pale grubs he dug from a rotting log. He skewered them on a thin green branch and set them to roast over the flames. The smell that rose was unexpectedly savory. It was the scent of cooking fat and seared protein, a smell that spoke directly to the empty, aching void in the aliens' stomachs. Their standard-issue nutrient bars tasted of chalk and regret. This smelled of life. The grubs sizzled, their pale skins turning a golden brown. When they were done, Leo pulled one off the stick with his fingers. He blew on it and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully. "Want one?" he called down, his voice casual. He tossed a cooked grub towards them. It landed on the moss with a soft thud. "Tastes like spicy bacon, a little crunchy." The 3 aliens stared at the offering as if it were a live grenade. "He is consuming uncatalogued insecta," Hissel whispered, horrified. "Its biological properties are unknown. It could be riddled with parasites or a paralytic neurotoxin, and he is offering it to us." Calvec's stomach rumbled. It was a traitorous biological response that his logical mind could not suppress. The data was undeniable. The human was warm, he was dry, and he was fed. They were not. Their superior intellect had failed to provide the most basic necessities of survival. This primitive had built a small pocket of civilization with sticks, vines, and stubborn persistence. For the first time, a seed of doubt began to sprout in Calvec's perfectly ordered mind. Perhaps their definition of primitive was flawed. The 3rd day dawned, and with it came a change. The aliens awoke from a fitful, shivering sleep to find Leo already awake. He was perched on his platform, sharpening a piece of flint against a larger rock. The fire was stoked, and the scent of something vaguely tea-like hung in the air. It was in this moment of reluctant truce that Calvec spotted it. A thin, dark column of smoke was rising from beyond the eastern ridge. It was too steady, too uniform to be a wildfire. "That is a synthetic burn," Calvec stated. His logical mind immediately classified the phenomenon. A manufactured energy source or combustion event, not native. Hisal's head membranes flared in alarm. It could be a component of the exam, an environmental hazard escalation. "Or another test group," Varus added, his voice a low thrum. "The parameters allow for competitive scenarios." Leo shaded his eyes with a hand, squinting at the distant plume. "Or it's a crashed ship full of nutrient bars," he said. His voice cut through their complex analysis with jarring simplicity. "Worth a look." He stood up. He grabbed a sharpened stick he'd been using as a digging tool and a makeshift satchel woven from broad leaves. "I'm checking it out." "Investigation is illogical," Calvec protested, taking a step forward. "The risk-to-reward ratio is fundamentally unfavorable. We do not know what created that signal. It could be a lure." "Could be," Leo agreed, already starting to walk. "But staying here and slowly starving is a guaranteed loss. Taking a chance is just a potential one. I like those odds better." The aliens exchanged uncertain glances. The primate's logic was brutishly simple, yet it was impossible to refute. With a collective sigh of resignation that sounded like leaves skittering across pavement, they followed him. The journey was a lesson in the planet's casual lethality. Calvec, his eyes on his internal environmental scanner, failed to notice the coiled, root-like tendril lying across the path until it snapped shut around his leg. It was a snapper vine, a predatory plant that constricted its prey before injecting a fast-acting digestive enzyme. Kyle Vec let out a surprised grunt. Leo acted without hesitation. He did not try to fight the vine. He simply picked up a heavy melon-sized fruit from a nearby bush and shoved it into the plant's mouth near the base of the tendril. The vine, its simple nervous system confused by the unexpected offering, released Kalvek to focus on its new meal. A short while later, they entered a grove of giant, mushroom-like flora that puffed clouds of iridescent spores into the air. Hisal, with his hypersensitive respiratory system, inhaled a lungful. He immediately began seeing the geometric patterns of his own DNA helix overlaid on the scenery. Varys's 4 eyes dilated as the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of overlapping realities. Kalvek's logical mind fought the effect, but it left him dizzy and disoriented. Leo just sneezed. "Ugh, pollen's a killer," he grumbled. He grabbed the disoriented Hisal by an arm and guided him forward. "Come on, guys, hold your breath and walk fast. It's just like that one patch of ragweed behind my grandma's garage." By the time they reached the source of the smoke, the aliens' awe was beginning to eclipse their fear. The human did not just survive. He moved through the world with an effortless competence that felt like a superpower. In a swampy clearing lay the wreck. It was a sleek, angular survey pod, its hull scorched and half sunk in the black mud. The smoke came from a smoldering power conduit. Claw-like marks, too uniform for any animal, were gouged deep into the metal near the open hatch. "This site is contaminated," Hisal hissed, backing away. "The previous occupants may have been afflicted with an unknown pathogen." Leo was already halfway inside. "Empty," he called out. "Looks abandoned. Some old ration packs, cracked solar battery." His voice trailed off. He emerged a moment later, holding a length of metallic fiber cabling. "Hey, look," he said with a grin, coiling it up. "Free rope." While the aliens stood back, debating the potential microbiological dangers, Leo Vance scavenged. He pulled a bent metal panel from the hull, testing its edge. He found a still functional power cell from a broken toolkit. He stripped the insulation from a control panel, revealing fine copper wiring. To the Zenith Combine's finest, it was a tomb, a warning, a place of unknown danger. To the human, it was a hardware store. On the 6th day, the jungle held its breath. The change was not gradual, it was absolute. One moment, the air was a thick tapestry of clicks, hums, and distant shrieks. The next, there was only a profound, ringing silence. The ever-present buzz of sapflies vanished. The rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth ceased. Even the wind seemed to die in the canopy above. Hisal's respiratory membranes pulsed nervously in the sudden stillness. "This is it," he whispered, the sound unnaturally loud. "The final escalation. The Concord always includes a climax event." Kalvek stood rigid, his analytical mind processing the sudden lack of data. Absence of stimuli is a classic predatory tactic. The apex hunter silences the environment before it strikes. It was then that they heard the sound from the ridge. It was not a roar or a shriek, but a low, grinding rattle like stone being dragged over bone. Trees at the edge of the clearing shivered. Their branches cracked as something immense pushed its way through. When it emerged into the clearing, the aliens' advanced minds struggled to categorize it. It was a biomechanical horror, a thing that defied natural evolution. Its torso was a mass of dark, chitinous plates from which sprouted 6 metallic limbs. 2 ended in chittering mandibles and 4 ended in razor-sharp claws that dripped a viscous, steaming fluid. An array of crystalline lenses glowed with cold, blue light from its featureless head. As it moved, the very moss beneath its feet blackened and died. Varys let out a choked gasp. Kalvek's internal sensors screamed data at him, energy readings that matched no known weapon, a composite armor with no discernible weaknesses, a locomotion pattern that was both fluid and terrifyingly precise. "Its defenses are absolute," Kalvek stammered, his usual composure shattering. "Its kinetic absorption and energy dispersal ratings are off the charts. All approaches are statistically futile." The Warden construct swiveled its head, its blue lenses fixed on the huddle of terrified aliens. It raised a claw, and a low hum of charging energy filled the air. They were going to die. "Yeah, well, it's got knees, don't it?" The voice was Leo's. While the others were frozen in analytical terror, He was moving. He had already grabbed the bent metal panel from the crash pod, holding it like a shield. In his other hand was a burning branch. Its end was wrapped in a sap-soaked rag that now blazed like a torch. He was not calculating odds. He was preparing for a brawl. He sprinted not away from the creature, but towards it, angling to the side. "Hey, ugly!" he roared, waving the torch. The warden's lenses swiveled to track him. As it turned, its heavy foot snagged on a thick vine Leo had stretched between two roots earlier that morning. It was a simple tripwire. The biomechanical monster stumbled. Its balance was thrown for a critical second. It was the opening he needed. "Kick him!" Leo yelled. "Varys, make some noise! Hissel, get behind the big tree!" His words, simple and direct, broke through their paralysis. They were not strategic commands. They were primal instructions. Varys, acting on pure instinct, let out a series of booming percussive calls. The sound echoed through the clearing and momentarily confused the warden's audio sensors. Hissel, using the speed he'd previously only used for fleeing, darted behind the creature, a fleeting distraction. The warden, recovering its balance, swiped at Leo with a massive claw. Leo met the blow with the scavenged metal panel. The sound was a deafening clang of tortured metal. The panel bent nearly in half and the impact sent Leo staggering back, but it had held. Calvec, seeing the human's insane gambit, finally acted. His logical mind screamed that it was futile, but his eyes saw a leader fighting. He picked up a heavy rock and hurled it with all the force his powerful quadrupedal body could muster. It struck one of the warden's blue lenses, cracking the crystal. The creature let out a shriek of static and rage, turning its attention to Calvec. It was another opening. Leo scrambled forward, his sharpened spear held like a javelin. The warden's movements, now focused on Calvec, had exposed a small, pulsating joint near its central torso, where hydraulics and organic muscle tissue merged. It was a power conduit. With a final desperate roar, Leo lunged. He drove the fire-hardened point of his spear deep into the joint. There was a shower of blue sparks. The warden construct convulsed, its limbs flailing wildly. It let out one last, ear-splitting shriek of feedback, and then collapsed into a heap, silent and still. For a long moment, the clearing was quiet again. There was only the sound of ragged breathing and the crackle of Leo's discarded torch. The three aliens stared, first at the motionless monster, then back at the lone human. He was leaning on the broken shaft of his spear, covered in mud and sweat, panting for breath. Their worldviews had not just shifted, they had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. A low hum, alien to the natural sounds of Viridian 7, filtered down from the canopy. A circle of light pierced the gloom. Through the opening in the trees, a Zenith Combine extraction shuttle descended with silent, gravimetric precision. Its ramp lowered onto the scarred earth of the clearing, bathing the scene in the clean, white light of civilization. The aliens stumbled towards it, their movements stiff and weary. But their formation was different now. Hissel did not flee towards the safety of the ship. He paused, looking back at the human. Calvec, the logician, walked over to the broken shaft of Leo's spear. He picked up the metal tip, examining the crude but effective craftsmanship with a new, profound respect. As Leo finally moved toward the ramp, the three aliens instinctively made way. It was a silent, unconscious gesture of deference. On the shuttle ride back to the Orbital Academy, they sat in silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one born of fear in the jungle. It was a silence of deep, contemplative reassessment. They kept glancing at Leo, who had fallen asleep in his crash harness. His face was smeared with dirt in dried alien fluid, and he was snoring softly. The debriefing room was a sterile white circle, the antithesis of the jungle. A council of proctors sat on an elevated dais, a stern Calvetian, a shimmering Hissalian, and an ancient, unblinking Varun. Holographic screens floated in the air, replaying footage from the trial. The performance of candidates Hissal, Calvec, and Varys was, to be frank, abysmal, the lead proctor stated, his voice devoid of emotion. You failed to establish a secure perimeter, failed to procure sustainable nutrition, and were functionally incapacitated by standard environmental stressors. The three candidates accepted the critique without protest. It was accurate. The proctor then turned his gaze to the human. Candidate Vance, your case is an anomaly. He gestured to a screen showing a time-lapse of the treehouse construction. You ignored every primary survival protocol. Your actions were erratic, unscientific, and based on no discernible methodology. And yet, you succeeded. Explain your methods. What advanced survival algorithm did you secretly employ? The room was silent. The three alien candidates leaned forward, eager to hear the secret. Leo, who had cleaned up but still looked profoundly out of place, simply shrugged. Algorithm? Sir, I just built a treehouse, and I remembered what my scout leader back on Terra taught me. Be prepared. The proctor's face remained blank, processing this absurdity. Be prepared? That is your explanation for neutralizing a warden construct? Well, that and a good sharp stick, Leo added. He pulled a small worn book from his pocket and placed it on the table. It was the Homesteader's Almanac, Volume 3. This helped too. Chapter 1 on knot tying is pretty solid. The proctors were speechless. They looked to the other candidates for a more rational explanation. It was Kalvek who spoke, his voice clear and steady. Sirs, your exam is flawed. The lead proctor turned, stunned. Explain that statement, candidate. You test knowledge, Kalvek stated. He looked from the proctors to the sleeping human on the screen. You program your trials with obstacles that can be overcome by superior data and logic. But this world, this crucible, it did not respond to logic. It responded to action. He gestured toward Leo. We tried to think our way through survival. He lived his way through it. You do not test for wisdom. The debriefing ended with the proctors in a state of confused deliberation, but the footage was undeniable. In the weeks that followed, a new directive was issued throughout the Zenith Combine Academy. The advanced course on theoretical survival strategies was suspended. In its place, a new mandatory module was introduced. Its primary text was not a complex algorithm or a xenobiological database. It was a scanned, translated copy of a worn, paperback book from a primitive world called Earth. The first lesson for every elite candidate was to watch the grainy, mesmerizing footage of a lone human, whistling an off-key tune as he built a home among the lethal trees of a verdant graveyard.